Okay, that's on. Hello, welcome to the 2024 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Kansas City, Missouri. I am Michelle Aielli, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. Here is a visual description of myself. I have long, dark hair that is braided to the side, and I am wearing a black jacket and black and gray striped pants. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I am a member of AWP's Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I am a member of AWP. Membership with AWP provides me with writing resources year-round, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like the Writer-to-Writer Mentorship Program and the AWP HBCU Fellowship Program possible. If you aren't already, I invite you to become a member today. We are delighted to bring you this event. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and the literary partner hosting this event, PEN America. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Now, before we start, some very brief housekeeping. Please silence your cell phone. Remember, there is no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table, which is right outside the door, before approaching them to have your book signed. Lastly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP be more accessible. Specifically, if you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 240-269-6635. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you, and now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Kasey Meehan, who will introduce this event.
Oh, that's bright.
It is bright.
Whoa.
We have it.
Good morning.
Hello, and good morning. Yes, that'll wake you up if you weren't already woken. And I know we have, like, if folks want to move on up too, we'd love to, feel free to come to the front. Although we can't really see anything that's going on past this stage. But thank you so much for being here. My name's Kasey Meehan. I'm the program director for Freedom to Read at PEN America, which is our program that's leading advocacy and efforts in pushing back against book bans and educational censorship playing out across the country. I'm really excited to be here with such a fantastic panel. We did just want to first start by acknowledging the silencing of authors worldwide and the profound loss of life we are seeing in Gaza. We also wanted to take a moment to center this panel and these fantastic panelists and the stories that they have, as well as the way in which they're navigating these profound attacks on the freedom to read, write, learn, create. And we're super lucky to have you all here today. Just a quick plug as well. If you're interested in learning more about educational censorship and book bans and the way in which this movement is showing up in our public schools and public libraries, PEN America is hosting a workshop at 1 o'clock later this afternoon, so feel free to swing by and we can go a little bit more in depth. But with that, I'd like to turn it over for some brief intros and just like a very short update on sort of like what are you working on? Again, it doesn't have to be book related, it could just be like life related, but who are you and what are you working on? I'll start with LL.
I am LL McKinney. You can call me L, pick whichever one's your favorite, I don't care. I am a not just a young adult author anymore. That changed in December. But thank you. I write books about young Black queer kids and comics about young Black queer kids, and now I write adult books about Black queer people. And what I'm working on right now is the second graphic novel for DC for Nubia Real One.
Ooh. Nice. Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Ryan Sala. I am the author of several young adult queer novels. My last two have been focusing in horror. One of them is The Honeys, which a lot of people have seen in a lot of airports. Let's see, what am I working on now? It's technically a secret, but between close friends. I have 2 more books coming out, but not this year. But I do have to write them. So I'm doing the thing that I always wanted to do, like growing up. I rented a cabin in like a seaside town that's closed for the winter. And I'm gonna bring my cat.
Take us with you, no?
No.
So you're starring in your own book before you get writing in the other one?
I'm like what you would call like a method writer, you know? Like to put myself in perilous positions, as we'll get to on the panel, in order to mine that for the gold that it is. But yeah, that's what I'm working on next.
Thanks, Ryan. Laurel.
I'm Laurel Snyder, and I write books for many, many ages. So I've done some adult books, but mostly picture books, middle grade novels, a lot of magic. But there's no rhyme or reason to it. Every book sort of tends to be very, very different than the last one. My most recent novel is called The Witch of Woodland. It's a middle grade kind of like magic in the real world kind of story. And I have a graphic memoir coming out in 2 years that I'm very excited about called Fairy Hunter. That's sort of the story of me, which is a new and weird thing to be putting out there. And I'm not sure what that's gonna feel like. And the thing I'm mostly working on right now is I have a junior and a senior in high school, so I do a lot of college applications. If anybody needs help with that.
A different form of writing.
Yeah, right.
Hi, I'm Padma Venkatraman, and before I became an author, I was an oceanographer, and when I was an oceanographer, I was the only BIPOC female in my incoming graduate class. That was a long time ago, and the reason I say that is because my next novel, which is coming out next year, is the first one to ever have any kind of oceanographic theme in it. And it's called Safe Harbor. And to date, the other novels that I have, 5 novels, have nothing to do with oceanography. And I also write poetry for adults. And I have a teenager, so maybe I will be doing Laurel's services soon, the college stuff.
I have 0 teenagers.
I want to apply for college again. I feel like it'd be so good.
Well, if you need help, you just let me know.
I live in the Upper West Side, and I always think about putting up posters being like, do you want me to get your snooty child into Columbia? Let me help you.
Can you do that?
No. But I will accept their money.
Well, part of the impetus of this panel and this conversation is because we are witnessing the way in which efforts to, silence and suppress ideas, histories, identities are playing out in our public schools and public libraries across the United States over the last, 2.5 years with increased kind of scale and magnitude. So I want to start us off by asking you all to share, how have you faced censorship in your writing careers? Either an instance of a book ban, or I know there are many forms of censorship that may have impacted, you or one of your books.
Do you want us to just jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
We just, my books don't draw as much attention. And it's always sort of an interesting experience when this happens. And I think it's one of the things that I like to share with people is this is happening to all sorts of books across the board. This is not about anyone. It is about targeting people and limiting access for children. It's not about any topic or subject. And so my books tend to be if you picked, I have a book called Charlie and Mouse that won the Geisel Medal and then was carried around, 5 years ago, my Republican governor's wife took it and carried it around to pre-Ks and kindergartens and read it to children all over the state of Georgia. That's where we were 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now it's being banned, and it's being banned because of one house on, it's a little picture book, like a Frog and Toad type story. One house has Mr. Eric and Mr. Michael living in it. And I know. And one of the children, Mouse, in the book, is identified as he, him, and wears a tutu. And for those reasons, this book is being banned. So I feel like it's just, that's sort of my place where I entered this is that, like, the book that's currently, I have a book that was just fought down. They tried to ban it in West Virginia, and ultimately it was retained. But the problem with that one was that it's a fractured fairy tale, that, like a choose your own adventure style story that follows Little Red Riding Hood. But in one of the paths, she has the option to kiss Sleeping Beauty and wake her up. And so for that, there was this whole rigmarole within the school, within the district, within the school boards. So that's sort of where I entered the story, is like, it's all the books. They just want to attack everything.
For sharing.
I feel like
Everybody's looking at me. Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say that I feel like when we have the conversation, there's a difference between whether or not they're banning the author or whether or not they're banning the story. Mm-hmm. Because I have books that have rankled people, like one of my books is an Alice in Wonderland retelling. And some of the pushback that I got is, why are you blackwashing Alice? And I was like, this little girl who goes on this drug trip, I'm sticking to it. She somehow got into her older sister's acid supply. And to say that I'm blackwashing this story means that I have no ownership over the story. I have no, like, even though this, the classics or whatever, this mythos, this idea, and we don't even really ever get to the point, because we're so busy fighting this, we never really get to the point of how have these books been decided that they were going to be upheld on this pedestal as the ones that we, aspire to. But when you have a culture that did everything it could to erase your entire being for however many hundreds of years, and then to have the nerve to come back and try and say, you can't participate in what we have forced upon your bloodline, upon your people, like, that story belongs to me as much as it belongs to the white person saying, why are you blackwashing Alice? Mm-hmm. So I think that, yes, anybody can be banned, but they are very specifically going after particular demographics for a reason, because it's right out of the playbook. Like, they're gonna go after Black and queer people because that's what they did 40 years ago. I mean, they never stopped. Let's just get that out the way. They never stopped. So even if there's a person who wrote the book and they may not share an identity with the character that's the reason somebody's banning it, to say that there's no specific identity that they're going after, I feel does their work for them in a way. Because then you're like, well, there's nobody I have to protect if they're not going after anybody specifically. And there's always somebody specifically that they're going after. It's never not a thing. So that's just what I had to contribute to that. Is that me?
What?
Making noise? Sorry, I hear like a womp, womp, womp. That might be something I need to get checked out. That's okay.
Are you in your sister's acid supply?
It would be nice.
I think with me for, like, the whole book banning thing for me began with, like, the Krauss list. Does this ring a bell for anybody? It was like a Texan thing. Has since sort of fallen off of the face of, like, relevancy because that election's over, right? And oftentimes we see these things pop up around instances where people are trying to basically use children and save the children and pearl clutching to kind of raise support for conservative ideals. And so Jeffrey Krauss, I forget. I should know his name. He's a huge fan of mine. Matt? Okay. Well, he's read all my books so far.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. So my first 2 books got banned, and I made sure he got his hands on the 3rd because that was coming out, and I wanted him to have a perfect record. And I have to say, and then eventually the books got added back onto somebody somewhere had to do like a book report on them. Yep. And they're really good, so. But then, since then, for me, like, censorship has turned into kind of this like personal matter where, because I'm male presenting and because I'm flamboyant and because I write about like queer characters, specifically like queer kids, the sort of age-old claims of like perversion kind of come for me oftentimes, in the form of like, how could we be exposing our children to this? And this in this instance is like, me living my life out and about. Like, recently a parent group posted photos that they could not believe that I was being brought into school, and they were photos from my Instagram. And they are photos of me in not much clothing, but I also am at the beach, right? Like with my family and my like 2-year-old niece, right? Like a place where people typically aren't in like full suits. And so those attacks have been waged against me. And then recently, I was even in Hawaii for a book event, and what had sort of started as like some protesting online turned into literally me being briefly abducted by like missionaries that wanted to kind of like pray the gay out of me.
Oh my gosh.
And so, yeah. And so like, for me, it has turned into kind of a very personal endangerment issue that I've had to kind of like balance against the will that I have to remain public and accessible to my audiences. So I haven't backed down. Like I'm here right now, right, talking about it. But it's an interesting contrast against, you know, people who kind of they maybe get their books banned, but it turns into, you know, something glorious for them, versus people like me who get trapped into the back of taxis with people praying over them. Really different conversation.
Yeah.
Well, is that like banned books, it's good for the book, and it's like, it depends on, no, it's not.
Oh, yeah.
It's
yeah.
not.
Yeah, we can
Show
we
me
can
where
debunk
this
that.
is good
Yeah.
for,
Yeah, I have a lot to say about
explain it to me like I'm 5, how this is good for anybody.
that. Yeah, truly.
Yeah, I can actually just hop in on that and say that my, I had to look this up. So my invitations have dropped by 75% compared to the time before my book, Born Behind Bars, was challenged. And Born Behind Bars was challenged for a couple of reasons. For one reason, which was that I make a parallel between what takes place in India, which is highly unjust, and what happens here, which is the mass incarceration of African American people. And because of that, when I was recently going to go to a school, this was one of the most recent sort of censorship events. This is not exactly banning. They said, come, come, come. Then they decided just before I was supposed to fly out, 24 hours, within the 24-hour period before I was supposed to fly out, that if I came, I should not mention black people, which I should not speak about domestic violence, which I'm a survivor of, and it is a part of my books in an age-relevant way. And you know, there were other silly objections as well. And so I would underline what Elle says. I do think that primarily they're going after people who are LGBTQ, or authors who identify with that, or characters who are of that identity, black and other people of color who speak out about that openly. And because I told you, when I came to Virginia many years ago, I had a noose hung in my yard. So my default, as I identify myself, has always been as a person of color, and I am proud of that. And because of that, I have had to deal with all sorts of repercussions as well. And the other objection that was made was that the child in my book, Born Behind Bars, is half Islamic, and there's a lot of Islamophobia as well. And so a lot of the authors being banned these days are also authors who are Muslim or have a connection with that identity.
That's right. PEN America does, every once in a while, we have category analysis of like the content that's in the books, because you're right, it's like content and authors that are being, you know, identified. And our most recent report also showed the way in which once an author is kind of identified as like a banned author for one work, it shows up across all their whole portfolio, as well as author visits in different ways. You know, I wanted to take us like a little bit broad for a moment, because since we're here in Kansas City, I think many of us understand the importance of access, and you know what access looks like in different spaces, to information, to ideas, to books, to conferences, to publishing. So interested, like, how do you all think about access to reading, to writing, publishing, and how has maybe that showed up, you know, differently, or how has access been just so important or potentially a barrier to it in your careers?
I was really lucky growing up because I knew that I was queer right away. And do you know who else knew? My mom. And so the second she figured that out, which didn't take a rocket scientist, she was like, okay, I'm gonna make sure that like my kid knows that gay people exist and that they survive and that they feel joy and happiness. So like, you have to imagine like 7-year-old me on the phone with like her coworker who she thought might be gay. This poor man was like, hello? And I was like, hello? But we would go to Provincetown, which is like a gay haven in the Northeast and things like that too. And that's why when I figured out that, oh, I'm queer, I knew that like that wasn't the end for me because I had seen many queer families throughout my entire life. So had my family, and so it wasn't this huge thing. And that's like an amazing thing that access can do, not only for maybe like a queer kid in a family, but for the family and the community around that person. So we're not just talking about depriving a queer kid of seeing themselves reflected in the book. We're talking about depriving a community of understanding that these people are real, they're not perversions, and they're not like, they're not like gimmicks, right? And when eventually it became time to become a writer, because we all get the call at one point. I remember like, because I had such a good relationship with my own queerness as like a high schooler, I looked around for books that showed this, and there weren't any that I could find in young adult, and I just couldn't believe that like Twilight, a book about boys that sparkled with body glitter, wasn't also about those boys kissing one another, because all the boys that I knew that sparkled did not care about Bella Swan. They cared about Charlie Swan. And so, and the point being is that like I took it upon myself to write my way into the industry. So I started writing books from a really young age as a high schooler. They were really queer right away. And then I fought really hard to kind of get those in there. So I feel like, and I think many of us here probably had to kind of create our own access and make sure that we were delivering a safe space for whoever comes next. And it's been sort of the privilege of my career to watch my books get used to rationalize other queer books getting picked up by publishers, because my books have done as well as have they, oh my God, as well as they've done. Damn it.
Words.
Yeah, it's early for me, guys, please.
I sort of want to respond to that just to say that like, I think for me, it was the opposite, which is that I had to be re-educated about how much access I had, right? That I am straight and I am white and I am, like, I've been coming to AWP for 25 years, and when I think about who I was at 1999 and who I thought I was and how hard I thought my struggle was, and because it's hard for everybody, right? This isn't an easy job for anybody. Nobody opens a door and just walks through into success.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was struggling, and I back then, we really, I mean, honestly, things do change slowly, but they change, and I look around this space now, and I look at the panels that are happening and the people here, and I feel like I can see the work that has done.
Yeah.
So I teach in a residency program at Hamlin, which is an MFA in writing for specifically children and young adults. And that's been really, I've been there for almost 8 years now, and that's been a really interesting experience of having to, as a teacher, re-educate myself, figure out how to mentor and advise students who maybe haven't had the access I've had, and how to sort of open those doors and sort of share some of that, which I feel like I don't want to take up space talking about it too much, but it does feel like something that's a message that I want to bring to AWP, because sometimes those are the people who feel like, well, I'm not a part of this conversation, but we're all a part of this conversation, and if the people who have access don't use that and extend it, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely.
And we need their voices, right? Like they make our literature, like their whatever, but like everyone's literature makes everybody better. So.
It's very, because I always like to not apologize for, here comes the depressing bit, because I always think when it comes to access, it was like, well, for access, some of us, it started off where it was illegal for us to be able to read or write in what was eventually going to become our own native language after they pounded everything else out of you. So it comes, for me, looking back on that history and acknowledging that y'all didn't want us to participate in this from jump. Like, let alone have access to books or write. It was illegal for us to even consider participating in it. So to go from that and to try and explain that wanting to keep that group out has not stopped. It has not lessened. It's just changed how, like they've changed how they, and when I say they, I mean white supremacy and the construct that is whiteness and all these other social constructs that we have, and the people who are very interested in keeping it a particular way. Because the denied access not only limits education, it limits access to the truth, it limits access to what actually happened, which is why we end up with having to fight books about smiling enslaved people, or people walking around saying it wasn't that bad, at least you got to learn blacksmith. Like, if you don't, woosah. So when you rob somebody of being able to even share that narrative, then you're able to paint a narrative for them, for everybody else who's able to participate in this in a way that they can't. Because I can't say, oh, that's wrong if I can't read it. So it's very, for me, it's very personal. I mean, for everybody, it's very personal, but it just ties into how this has always been the way. I have not known any other way. Like in 2nd grade, my mother pulled me and my sister out of an entire school because they tried to say I didn't know how to read. But I was reading at like an 8th grade level. It's like, I was just bored. You're giving me See Jack Run, Mary Jumps a Bucket. And I'm like, I would like to read the Hardy Boys, please. Like, you know, those were the books that we had. And then like in my freshman year in high school, I would finish my work early, which bothered my English teacher for some reason, because I would start working on my own things. And my English teacher pulled my parents. This is before, you know, you could go online and say, these people are treating my black child badly. They pulled my parents aside and said, writing is a distraction for Latrice and she should stop.
Oh my God, really?
Yes.
That's crazy.
And I was 14, I was a freshman, and it was because I would finish the assignments and work on my own thing, and there was no way for her to be able to punish me for that. But if you are, and I don't get a lot of what other black girls get because I glow in the dark. Like, I'm very light-skinned. So I have sisters who got worse because they are dark-skinned. So it was like, oh, you're misbehaving, and it's like, no, I'm sitting here quietly writing to myself, and you won't let me go forward in the work, you know. So I was being punished for excelling. And I see this happening with my nieces and nephews, and I see this happening with other black and brown kids. It's where if you're excelling, something's wrong with you, or they have to put you in your place, and it still happens to this day. And so that's what access is for me. It's allowing this person to not be told that they don't know what they know. Like, you're not gaslit. It's this whole thing of gaslighting. So that's where access is for me. Is when you have access, it's not easy enough for them to gaslight you.
I'm just going to take this to a more general level and say one of the things that happened when I first came to this country was that, you know, along with the nooses and all the horrible things, I walked into a public library. And it was amazing to me, speaking of access, that I could walk in and without any money at all, which I didn't have any, I could have access to any book I wanted, was what they told me, right? And what is happening now with the book banning movement is that they are taking books like ours that help kids out even of public libraries, of school libraries. And the point that we make a lot is that books save lives. And, you know, yes, I'm not trying to say any of our books is the one thing that some kid suddenly, you know, uses and saves their entire life. But I'm sure we all have stories like this. There are kids that use books as mirrors, even if they don't see themselves precisely in it, by which I mean I had a Latina reader once walk up to me and say, she went to college because she was inspired by the protagonist of Climbing the Stairs. The protagonist of Climbing the Stairs lives in India in the 1940s. I had another kid from Peru, a young woman from Peru, recently write to me and say the very same thing about Climbing the Stairs and how it influenced her life. So these are people very different in the world. And I had another kid who said they had been teasing a child who had an incarcerated parent and stopped because of Born Behind Bars. And so when you take away access, you prevent children from being able to see themselves in these books and also see others in these books. And Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, whom I hope all of you do know, and if you don't, please look up her work, speaks about how books, especially books for young people, can be mirrors or windows or sliding glass doors. And I would argue that any excellent book is not just one or the other, it is all three.
It's maybe worth mentioning too that there are different ways that access gets limited, and so whereas sort of the things we read about in the paper, these big book banning situations that tend to target very specific people in very specific communities, that is one thing that happens. And the other thing that happens is people just take books off the shelves, right? They don't want the kids to have access. They remove them quietly. And so that can be a harder thing to spot, because then you have to look for what's not there, right? You have to go into the bookstore or the library or the school and say, I'm looking for books about queer kids, or I'm looking for books about BIPOC people. Because you'll just, but you really have to search for that. And so if you go into like your library's online system and start looking for books and they're not turning up at your local branch, you can go into your local branch and say, I would like to place an order for these books. And if enough people do that, sometimes those books find their way back on, because it hasn't been a fight. They're just trying to like avoid conflict. And both of those things are insidious, but they feel like very different moves to me.
Yeah,
And
we
also
often-
to your, well, I was gonna say, to your point, it helps when it's people who are not only from the communities who are being
100%.
impacted,
Yeah.
but allies. Because if I go in and I'm like, where's your Black History Month thing?
Totally.
Now I'm just the angry Black lady here to have something to say about it. You know, I get written off for I have a very valid reason for being upset. But again, like I was saying earlier, by removing my ability or a particular community's ability to write the narrative of themselves, now the narrative that pervades is, well, I'm just here to yell and start trouble. So like she was saying, like if other people, allies and stuff, if you go and request the books or you go and do the thing, and it's not just the person who is dealing with that particular oppression, because it's very easy for the oppressor to be like, I'm not going to pay attention, because they've been doing that this entire time. And they rely on everybody else not caring or not noticing or not pushing back against the, I'm not paying attention to you.
Yeah. I think
And with it's just that with soft censorship, which is pulling books off shelves, it also certainly affects writers. And seeing as we're in a space with a lot of young writers, you know, Islands End, one of my first books, which had this piddly little advance, did not even recoup that advance because it was subjected to soft censorship, just because I spoke about the religion of the people of these islands on which I had lived, the Andaman Islands, and I spoke about that with respect. And so there were a lot of people who felt that they were Christian and therefore could not accept this book because this book spoke about the devil and witchcraft and all this kind of nonsense. But it wasn't done in a very public way. And so it quietly got pulled off the shelves, and that almost stopped my career. And when I decided that I would go on, the reason that I speak up so strongly, the reason that I amplify other voices of marginalized and underrepresented authors are because I went through that experience and had to fight tooth and nail to stay in this business, because everyone knows it's not easy. And soft censorship is something that can affect us that way.
If I can add one thing, which is that we never, it's something that doesn't come up a lot, that there are lots of ways we divide ourselves into groups, and one way here at AWP is that we all write for children and young adults, which is its own silo. And for those of you who don't write for children and young adults, this is something you can participate. We need you at the school boards, we need you at the libraries, we need you involved in this conversation, because this is just the beginning of this, and we're sort of getting to have this experience first, yay. But there's a new organization called Authors Against Book Bans, and I have some flyers, and there are some flyers also at the book fair. I'll leave some at Penn if I can. But if you guys would like to join us, right now it is largely children and young adult authors, but hopefully this will grow and we can all work together as a literary community beyond our sort of, our baby pool.
Can I use that to segue into other organizations that I think would be really useful for the audience to know about? So A, for Authors Against Book Bans. B, for Brooklyn Public Library has this fantastic initiative. It's called Books Unbanned. C, for National Coalition Against Censorship. If you don't know what that is, please look that up. And I mean, there's so many different ways that you can help these organizations. You can join them, or you can, if you feel wealthy enough, support them financially, or just inform yourself sometimes to be able to speak to your neighbors, to be able to speak in these public places, because they have, talking points and so on. SCBWI is another C that I can think of. If you don't know We Need Diverse Books, please look at that organization and support them. And then E, for Every Library, which is another initiative that I would call to your attention. And F for freedom, so there's Florida has
alphabet
this like
soup
freedom
of,
to write project,
That's amazing.
and F for FU to all the haters.
There you go.
Yes.
Good job.
Thank you, Padma. You know, I think there's so many, it was like, I appreciate the richness of that discussion because I think, you know, oftentimes we'll say you can't ban a book if it's not there. I come from Philadelphia. The entire school district, this is hundreds of thousands of students, have one public school librarian. Classroom libraries are dismal.
Wow.
So we count what is countable, but there's so, you know, just lack of access is huge. You know, we also point to book bans as bellwether of something, you know, much more deeper, which I think is clear from the conversation we're having here too. So just by way of added context, over the last 2 school years, PEN America has recorded over 6,000 instances of book bans. Many of these books are books by or about Black and brown characters and authors, LGBTQ+ characters and authors, books that talk about race and racism, books that talk about sex and sexual experiences, sexuality. And I think in that, people like jump adult. But the reality of this is over 75% of all the books that are removed are young adult books or children's books or younger, like middle grade, picture books, young adult books. And as a panel of young adult and children's writers, as well as adult writers, of course, you know, I think there's something that's just like exceptionally, I don't know, harmful about removing books for young people in this way and removing books that are developed and, you know, written with that audience so central. So just interested if you all can talk about like, how do you just write for young people, and then how do you know, why is diminished access to books for young people just so awful? There's some big questions for y'all.
It's so early in the morning.
Well, books for children are a safe way for children to encounter things that might actually confuse or trouble them, right? So this isn't even like, I have this book called Orphan Island that has a menstruation scene in it. And a number of times I've gone to a school and they'll say, well, we have that in the middle school, but we can't shelve that in elementary because of the menstruation scene. Because 5th grade, I mean, even if they didn't already get their periods in 4th and 5th grade now, like they are making these decisions. So let's say a kid encounters that. Even if we're not talking about like edgier material or whatever, but let's say we take something just like that. Let's say a 2nd grade boy encounters a menstruation scene in a book, and he's confused and upset by it. Like, the nice thing about a book is you close it, you put it away, you walk away from it. It's actually a really good way of kids learning to do self-care. So I mean, I feel like that's one of the, like I sort of never censor as I write for children. Sometimes things get massaged in an editorial pass or something like that, but the idea of taking something out because kids can't handle it, they live in a world, and the world is full of all the things. And every kid goes home and experiences all the things in that home or on the street or in their school, whatever. The idea that we can't put all of the things in those books really, really troubles me.
Yeah, I come at this from the perspective of, I'm a horror author, right? So I'm writing about horrific things, kind of my job. And yet, like, when I was in Hawaii, for instance, during this brief kidnapping, one of the claims was that my book, The Honeys, supports the killing of your sibling. Okay, so the context here is that The Honeys starts off with a character sort of being awoken by their sister who's suddenly home from summer camp, and she tries to murder the main character. But in the ensuing fight, the sister ends up being the dead one at the end of it, and it propels the main character to try to figure out what exactly was going wrong in their sister's life and to piece her life together, the last sort of months of her life together, to figure out who she was in the end, sort of why she was lonely enough to do what she did, and so on and so forth. The great irony of this, of being told in like Facebook messages that I'm supporting the killing of one sister, is that this wasn't just an editorial creative choice that I made. My own sister passed away really suddenly in 2018, and I was young and I didn't really know how to deal with that grief, and so I wrote a book about it. And so the irony of this act of sort of self-preservation and like self-therapy that this book was for me, being turned into something that I've scandalized just to get at, I don't know, get back at like Christians, I guess, is so deeply absurd, but demonstrates that oftentimes the books that we're writing, which seek to take these very heavy topics and turn them into a prism by which maybe someone young can sort of look through and find some sort of clarity within, you know, people aren't seeing us that way. They're just seeing the sensationalized aspect of it, and that's a reading comprehension problem, to be
Yeah,
honest.
totally, yeah.
But it's a willful misreading, and it's a disingenuous misreading of often the job that young adult and children's authors are taking upon themselves. When I sit down to write about the horrific things in my books, I do so because I want to find an edifying way to monstrosize something that is, as an adult, really diffuse, right? Like, we oftentimes don't get closure when we're dealing with grief. But I can write a young adult novel about a sibling trying to search for answers around their sister's sudden death, and I can deliver closure to that character. And I can give a place to people dealing with grief to explore these feelings with language that I've had to really fight to pull out of myself word by word. And that's a gift that I'm trying to give away. So to be told that it's perverted is
It
a really
also
frustrating
really
thing.
insults children. It
Oh, yeah,
suggests that
absolutely.
children can't read in a sophisticated and complex way and that they're not thinking about and navigating all of this stuff.
Yeah, the amount of messages I get of people that are in the middle of grief or that their grief counselor handed them my book, like teens specifically, tells me that I've done a good job. I don't doubt that, but it does frustrate me.
I think there's like a, well, I say I think because that's just what my brain puts in, but I know that one of the main things is that these things where children aren't prepared or children can't handle, it comes from a place of extreme privilege. To think that an entire community of children don't have to deal with this because you haven't had to deal with this. And it's like one of the, there are so many ways and different places I could go. Like this could be another hour long just for this.
sure.
But one of the things that I talk about that people outside of the Black community seem to like finally be grasping is when we say that we have to have the talk with our kids, there's one of 3 conversations that we're talking about. We're not just talking about birds and bees. We're also talking about this is what happens when you run into somebody who is of authoritative nature, like the police. If you are a Black or brown child, this is what you have to do so you can come home. So you can come home. And meanwhile, people are having this conversation, oh, well, if he pulls your hair, he likes you, and which, again, problematic in and of itself. But having that conversation and then saying, oh, well, kids can't deal with this in a book where it's not fiction, but it's not, you know, it's not happening to a person right now. Whereas, you know, I don't know anybody who hasn't lost a cousin or a friend or somebody to police violence, or in my own experience. So saying that kids shouldn't be exposed to this, well, do you not know what life is in Wyandotte County? Like, I'm going to use Kansas City because that's where I'm from and where I'm born and was raised. It's to say that, oh, well, this is too much to put in a book. That's Tuesday for me.
Yeah.
So you're saying that my existence needs to be erased so that it can make you and your kids comfortable. So you don't have to think about how you not saying something does lead to this happening to this person. I remember, and this is because, again, it's a book that most everybody knows about. If you don't know about it, I don't tell you. Where The Hate You Give, where Angie talked about how people have a problem with the F-bomb in her book. There's a 15-year-old child shot dead on the page, and that's not an issue. It's the fact that somebody somewhere said an F, oh, mercy me, you know, or where it's like, for DC, for the graphic novel that I have, it deals with racism and violence and sexism, and these are things that these kids have to deal with. I'm showing that these kids deal with it because I dealt with it as a teenager. The kids around me dealt with it as a teenager. Like, just because you don't want to acknowledge that it's the truth doesn't make it not the truth. So I would have people, and what they'll do is they'll pick on something that they can get other people who don't know better. I'm not gonna, I mean, hey, it is what it is. I'm not here to insult anybody's intelligence, but they don't know better. And they get you wound up around, oh, well, this person, none of the white people in the graphic novel, all of the white people in the graphic novel are villains or evil. And I'm like, Wonder Woman's right there. The Amazons are right there. You skipped over Wonder Woman so you could lie about my book, because I show that this is what these kids have to go through today. And the fact that I don't have children, meaning I'm pulling from some of my own memories, meaning 20 years ago nothing's changed. And that's what they want. They want nothing to change. So the more that they pull out, you know, because you don't do better until you know better. And the longer they can keep kids from knowing what their peers are dealing with, they could keep those kids from then growing up and wanting to make change to make the world better for the person who sat next to them in math class in 5th grade.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're exactly right. There's a lot of feeling very, very threatened if you are a straight white person in this country these days, and with everything, including religion as well. And I just want to mention that because we sometimes skip over that, and there are a lot of books with Islamic themes that are being banned as well. And I mean, I think that this idea of relevance as well, which is brought up so often, is only brought up when there's a character who's not straight or not white. And it's ridiculous because, you know, people will write to me and they'll be like, I don't think they can relate to your character because your character is brown, basically. And I think to myself, we don't have any brown kids in the school. This is just such a common thing also. And I think, A, if that's the truth, you need to do something about your student population. B, if all your kids are straight and all your kids are white, have any of them flown on brooms? No. But you have Harry Potter all over the place, that's no problem. How come? I mean, really? Right? Yeah. So this relevance argument is only used in certain specific ways, in certain specific demographics. And I think sometimes it comes from people who haven't even bothered to question that, because when I ask them that same question in a nice way, not like I said it now, then they're like, oh, wow, I never even thought about that.
Yeah, because their calculus of dehumanization is really important to people not to examine within themselves, because it's so crucial to just how they operate in the world itself. So when you ask a question like that, they have to face it, that they do dehumanize anybody with a marginalization. Yeah.
Well, it's like why everybody's like, oh, Zootopia did such a good job about talking about no, it didn't. Everybody who loves that movie because it tackled the hard subject didn't. You're in this for 101. I need you to go read some literature.
I do like the Shakira song in it, though.
It is. It's a bop.
It's a bop.
It's a bop.
But aside from that.
But everybody's like, oh, it did such a good job. And it drives me because you'll have people who are like, oh, I don't like books that preach. I like it when it's subtle. Well, we've been telling you subtle stories for how long, and you haven't gotten it yet. So I'm going to hit you in the face with it. What you going to do? You ain't going to fight me.
It also depends upon this argument that's basically that like a marketing argument or a capitalism argument, which is that like you buy the books that like the most kids will read the most times or something. So even if you have even if there's one kid in the school who needs a book about one particular subject, that kid still needs a bunch of books. Like it doesn't average in that way, right? Every kid, like there's a book in the library that one kid will read one time and it will transform their life. And that book needs to be there for that one child, even if nobody else ever picks it up. So even if this argument, which is garbage, even if this argument did make sense, it's built on this flawed logic that that's how books work.
Right.
And plus, I mean, if you have a kid, if you do have a straight white population in your school, you definitely need a very different population in your library, at least.
For sure,
of, you know, heroes. And that's, you know, I don't want to get into it too much, but one of the first times that I got like death threats and all the rest of that nonsense was when I spoke up about the fact that we have stuff, and I never said ban. I do not believe in banning any book, but when it was talking about classics, which you raised the point earlier, which is we have straight white men stuffed down our throats forcibly because they are prescribed reading. You have to read them. My daughter has no choice. Our books are in libraries. They are not being prescribed reading, unfortunately. I think they should, but they're not yet.
Yes.
And these are just books that a kid could or could not pick up because of choice. And I do get that as a parent. I myself am afraid of raising my child in today's world, but what I am most afraid of is that I will raise her in a world that is, in this country, that is not a democracy anymore. And that is what really the big problem is that we are shaking the foundation of our democracy as soon as we walk in and say, I am going to tell everybody that this book should not be for any child.
You know what that makes me think of too, that I've never thought of is, my kids are in the Atlanta Public Schools, and they have a fantastic reading list, and my kid has been reading amazing books in school, super diverse, very contemporary, really topical, and it's never occurred to me to like reach out to his school and be like, thank you so much for a really diverse topical reading list. Like that we sometimes get so caught in the negative stuff that we forget to go to the teacher who did the good job and say, thank you for doing the good job because I know you're working hard for not enough money.
Yeah, absolutely.
That like, I appreciate you saying that. Like that makes me think I need to go home and take home this message of like, good job, Atlanta, you know?
And stop making people read The Scarlet Letter. Stop making people
We're nowhere
read
near.
To Kill a Mockingbird. If I have to see To Kill a Mockingbird one more, I might lose it. I might. They've assigned that in a college. I was in a college writing course. To Kill a Mockingbird, absolutely not. I will take the F. Do not care.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I mean, there's so many librarians and so many teachers who are doing such a
Yeah.
marvelous job these days with all of the hate that's being directed against them. So if any of you out there in the audience
Yeah.
are one of them, thank you, thank
Yeah.
you, thank you from the bottom of all of our hearts.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, well, the segue is nice. I was going to ask, like, how, in this moment, like, how are you all resisting? And, like, what do you feel is, like, productive? And I think writing to, you know, your educators and applauding librarians for all their work. I will say, this is not to offend, but after college, I had the same feeling. When I graduated college, I was an English double major. And that was the last time I read a book by a white straight man. It's been 15 years, not one. That's my silent thing that I can resist. I'm like, I'm good. We got that. So anyway, I open it up. Like, how are you thinking about, like, what are your forms of resistance?
I think showing up can't be underestimated, at least for someone like me, where I'm like visibly gay, right? So like, and that sort of, the reality that I live in sort of exerts itself upon the reality that I'm in when I leave like the safe haven of like my apartment, right? I think queer to me is a verb, and it's sort of like an action, right? And going out and sort of cultivating these spaces and having discussions like this are really important to me, especially as someone who's been pursued, stalked, attacked, things like that too, right? The easiest thing would be to go back and hide, but I understand as a formerly queer child that to see a queer person in public, to see like two people holding hands, right? Like that really can't be underestimated in terms of what it means to that kid and their concept of the future. I also, when I was on book tour recently, I reached out to the various stores that I was going into in the schools and asked if there were banned book clubs or meetings, and there were. There are coalitions of people that are getting together on a local basis, dealing with this and discussing how to tackle this particular threat, and that was really amazing to see. It was disheartening to have like a meeting with the high school's banned book club, right? But the fact that they're meeting at all and that they're aware of this, I think, is a great countermeasure against what is almost always an issue brokered over sort of local politics.
Yep.
And so these people, they're discussing upcoming meetings, they're discussing votes, they're discussing the like predilections of the people that are going to be in power soon, right? And as an author, I kind of felt a little bit limited in what I could offer to them, but even knowing about what they're doing and then being able to tell a crowd of people that like in your local community, there's probably a coalition of people trying to do something about it, like that's really, I think, where a lot of the work has to get done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one important thing is that when we have these platforms, you know, when we're on tour or we're Zooming with a book like or whatever, that particularly for folks like me who are less vulnerable, that a big part of that is to share other people's books with the world. That like I'm there for my book, but like while I'm here, so like when I do like World Read Aloud Day or whatever, like that like I don't have to read my book. I can read somebody else's book because sometimes somebody like me can enter those spaces more easily. And for sure somebody like me is less likely to be attacked for sharing a book about a queer kid or a black kid or whatever. So to sort of think outside like self-promotion and lean into this as like a literacy movement and a freedom to read movement, and to sort of make all events that.
I think it also, there I go saying I think again.
You know.
I know that it also starts at our own individual places at home. While it's great to make the lists and it's great to make the posts for Black History Month or for Pride Month or for, you know, the holiday season when you have the various types of holidays going on, while it's great to acknowledge that while it's happening, you can talk about my book in April. You can talk about my book in August. You don't just have to talk about my book during Black History Month. I know that that's where it's where people feel safe talking about it. It's like, well, oh, everybody's talking about it, so nobody's gonna push back against it, you know. And starts pigeonholing not only the author and the story, but it starts, you know, for kids, it's like, well, I can only think to go look for this type of book during this month. And then outside of that, I go back to reading, you know, whoever the big white straight person is at the time, you know, because it, listen, you know, or either don't just buy the book, which great, yes, buy the book, but like read the book, engage with the book, because people are like, oh, well, I can't get into the book, or I just don't read that much, or, oh, I've never really, like, I don't not pick these books on you were taught to not pick these books. Whether or not you accept, that is the truth. Throughout schooling and all of that, you were taught these are the books that you go look for. These are the characters that you go look for. These are the authors that you go look for. And it has impacted the way that you read, whether you want to come to grips with that or not. And I'm speaking to everybody under the sound of my voice or the words that are popping up on the screen, both here and at camera at home. You were taught this. And you have to unlearn it. And some of us were lucky enough that we unlearned it early, or we had parents who fought against it when they were trying to teach it in school. Because, I mean, unless you went to a school in a different country than I did, this has always been what was taught. Individuals fought back against it and created those cracks. So to say that, oh, well, I don't not pick up queer books on purpose, that doesn't absolve you of not picking up queer books. It doesn't. And for you to be like, oh, well, I purposefully go and pick this book because it's Black History Month. Well, that's you also reaffirming that this particular marginalization should only be visible when it serves a purpose. Why is this person queer in this book? What is the point of them being queer in this book? What is the point of them being Black in this book? I exist because I exist. There is no point. I don't have to explain my existence to you. This character doesn't have to have a reason to exist other than they do. So the book doesn't, you don't need a reason to go read the book. You don't need a reason to talk about the book other than it's a good book that you enjoy. So yeah, go read and do these, it starts at home. And this is not I mean, it kind of is an indictment of your own personal choices, but I mean, they claim that they follow the money. And if the money is whether or not you do it on purpose or not, going all towards a particular demographic, then you're part of the problem.
And to Elle's point, I mean, I think if you have a book that you love, right, you don't say, hey, this is you know, it's not the character, it is the character, but it's also not the identity of the character that matters. There might be a kid that loves fantasy, and you say, hey, here's a great fantasy, right? So Ryan's book is horror, hey, you know, Halloween, I don't know, it's a scary, spooky time. Read it because of that, you know? So pair it up with something other than Pride Month. And that way, what you're doing is saying this book is about so many different things. Maybe this book is a fantastic adventure. Maybe this book is beautifully lyrical, so I'm reading it during Poetry Month. You know, there are other ways to look at our books. And to Laurel's point about raising other voices, I did want to, before, I don't know how long feels like we've been talking for a long time. I do want to pitch at least a couple of other authors' books that I love. I'm going to pitch Margarita Engel's Drum Dream Girl, which is lovely. I'm going to pitch Alex London, whom I love more than any other author in this world. I love him. I respect him. He is a wonderful human being. City of Dragons and all his other books. I was talking about Islamophobia, and what comes to mind are a couple of Islamic books that have been banned. The Arabic Quilt was banned. The Librarian of Basra was banned. Bilal Cook's Dal was banned. Meet Yasmin series is banned. Yeah, I could go on and on, but I will stop. I'll have to do two more. Out of Darkness by Ashley Hope Perez. And Angela Dominguez has a fantastic series of books for young people, and for some reason I cannot remember the name of the kid that's on the cover, but Angela Dominguez as well, please.
Can we each give a couple of plugs? Okay.
This will be we're gonna do like questions for each other, so let's just consider this
okay.
for each other.
So I'm obsessed with Queer Ducks by Elliot Schreifer.
Queer Ducks, yes.
So good, nonfiction, blow your mind. Adults should read it too. Everybody should read Queer Ducks. Tracy Battiste's African Icons. Fantastic, same kind of thing, like nonfiction, but you gobble it up, nonfiction, and like I have caught everybody in my house reading that book. It's for like all ages. And she doesn't need the plug, but I gotta say, like, Big by Vashti Harrison this year is just the most beautiful picture book in the world. Like, I opened it and was like, I can't remember the last time I had that feeling about a picture book. So if you have small children in your life, go get Big.
I can't stop recommending N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth trilogy. I just think it's like, was that a good sigh or bad?
Yes, no, it's a good sign.
Well, okay, we're talking about like, people keep recommending books through the dimension of like their diversity, which I think N.K. Jemisin, she gets brought up a lot, or they get brought up a lot because of the blackness of like this trilogy, well, all of their work, but specifically this one. But also, it is the most fantastic trilogy I've like ever read ever.
Who's recording this book list? I know to do better.
Write it down, thank you.
We'll come back.
She won 3 consecutive Hugo Awards for the first, the second, and then the third book in this. And
No one has done that.
No
by the
one's
way.
done this,
She's
right.
not the first Black author to do it. She is the first author
right.
to do it.
And she deserves it. And so anytime I'm talking to anybody that I think is old enough to kind of grapple with the major themes of that book, I recommend that all the time. And then on the other side of that, if you're looking for a magical alternative for your middle grade reader that doesn't put money into the pockets of transphobe,
We will not be named.
who will not be named, I have to recommend the Witchlings series by Claribel A. Ortega, which is set in sort of like the Hudson towns of New York, but it's about 3 young witches who, the night that they're supposed to get sorted into their coven, they don't make it into a coven, they're considered spare to their community, and then they have to figure out like a way around that, or else they get turned into toads. And it's the most like beautiful, cozy, wonderful writing. And I give that to I have like 100 copies of that, and I run out of 100 copies every month because I'm giving it away.
Oh God, I haven't read anything lately. I've been mostly writing.
The Honeys by Ryan LaSala.
There you go, The Honey. Yes. For middle grade, I have been obsessed with Eden's Everdark
Oh yeah.
by Karen. And all of my friends' names are jumping out of my head now. What is Karen's last name? Oh my God. Strong. Oh, if she sees this,
She's
Karen,
Georgia,
I'm
yeah.
so sorry.
Yeah.
I don't
You're
know why
finished.
your last name. But Eden's Everdark by Karen Strong is gorgeous. Oh my gosh. I always recommend the Tristan Strong books. That's how I got the boys in my family to start reading again. For YA, 10 Toes Down, The Legendborn Cycle,
Oh yeah.
please. Because I like fantasy. I love fantasy. And I'm going to recommend, instead of recommending more books, like if you have like a very popular white author, and every time you go to recommend one of those, I just ask to recommend 2 or 3 queer BIPOC authors as well, because it's like these authors, everybody already knows about them. Yes, it's an easy recommendation, and we love Percy Jackson, so forth and so on, but he doesn't need to be recommended anymore. People are gonna go find him anyway. Nothing against the books. Again, I read them and loved them. But if we're going to make the needle move, we have to oust old practices. Like if you get blown 50 feet this way and you're supposed to start here in order to go that direction, you can't even get there until you're brought back here. So in order to get to, out of the hole to ground zero where we can even start to begin to progress, you have to change the way that you do things, which maybe means not recommending the same people you've been recommending for 10 years. They do not need it.
I think do we have like a couple minutes? I've lost track of time, quite honestly, if we're supposed to be at 11:45 or 11:50. Let's just say 11:50. 6 minutes, great, thank you. 11:50 it is. So we'll do last question. I think, books are often revered as sort of this, as a tool for envisioning a better, more just future, right? Like how do you all think about that, and do you incorporate that into your work? Or do you not see books that way, which is totally valid too?
I mean, when we are writing, like how we think of them as a tool as we create them.
Okay, that's different. Because the way that I see books is, I write science fiction and fantasy, and 90% of the genre imagines a future where my people don't exist. So I got nothing, I have no love for that. I have, it's when your comfort zone is thinking that we just, for some reason, stopped being, I got no words for you. We cannot know. So I don't think of it that way. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of the way, especially this is why I'm like, well, you know, some people are doing better, but there are certain books that are held up the canon where, you know, it permeates to such a degree that we kind of talked about it after the fact, but people still, like, you bring it up and it's kind of a joke that Friends, for however many seasons, was in New York and not one black person, not one, in New York.
It's crazy.
In New York. You know, or other people of color. It's just like, and then nobody notices except the people who are, you know, impacted. And you don't notice because you haven't seen different. You weren't taught different. It doesn't stick out to you because that's always been the norm. So when I'm writing, you're gonna get this is blackity black, the black y'all. And if you, I bet you won't fight me. Or you could try. I tithe religiously to the Church of Nuck If You Buck, so come on. But that's how I view it, is when you have a genre who spent most of its time pretending that me and my people don't exist, and they did it for not just black, but for queer, for gender non-conforming, like it's just this whole blanket swipe of these people either did not exist, we were not invented until 1619, and we're not gonna be here after 2050. Like, it's, no. So that's my relationship with it. Do I have my favorites in the genre? Of course, I read it, come on. But at the same time, now we have N.K. Jemisin, and it's like,
What are they gonna do about her? They can't.
you can do nothing.
Well, sort of,
I will start flinging that book at people.
I think earlier we had talked about the fact that like there's been like 6,000 challenges or something like that too, which I know is a really scary number, but the fact that there's 6,000 things to challenge, to me, speaks to the fact that these people are in a really small minority, a really frothing at the mouth minority, and the thing that they're fighting against is a culture that's already taken the turn towards like more diversity and liberation. And yeah, they're being really vocal about it, but I'm really heartened by the fact that like when I look at the industry, I see a lot of people really trying to get their own words out there. And as an author, I sort of take it as my charge, like now that I'm established, to kind of make sure that that ladder doesn't get pulled up behind me, and those books keep getting produced. So I actually do have a lot of hope when it comes to kind of the future of books and their ability to kind of wage this war. But I do think that a lot of like the outcrying that we're seeing is basically a swan song that we have to make sure it doesn't gain traction.
It's like the,
Yeah.
Amen.
I don't, to be honest, I don't think about these things when I create to begin with. It sort of has a paralyzing effect for me. If I even think about the reader, like I write what I write,
Right.
and it comes out, and that's my notebook, right? Like that's, so I make a real effort to actually kind of clear out all of these voices when I'm just being me with my book. I do think about it when I revise, and I do think about it when I submit. So there are lots of things that I have written where I look back at that and I'm like, oh, that's old Laurel showing up on the page, and the world doesn't need this book right now. And I think that that's a process of like curation of your own mind that feels really important. But I allow myself to be my, whoever I am, however messy, however wrong, that person has to come to the page first before the other brain can kick in. So that feels really important to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I write the characters that visit me and haunt me, and there are so many of them. And one of the reasons that I choose to write those that are for young people is because speaking about the future and all of that, I like to speak to those people who are closer to the entrance than to the exit, like me. And the other reason that I write books that, of all the characters that haunt me, the ones that I pick are the ones that have realistic fiction, because I grew up in India. And even though I grew up there, when I was growing up, the books that were stuffed down my throat were still straight white men. And that is something that I was shocked by. The only time I saw women in my Indian stories were when they were mythological. So I associate that with fantasy, and I feel like we have a rich, fantasy mythological sort of culture where we do have women represented, whether strongly enough or not is a different thing. But we do have that. And so for me, I really wanted to break ground, which I like to think I have done.
I think you have to.
I think so.
Well,
too.
that
Thank you.
is a great way to wrap. So Padma, Laura, Ryan, Elle, thank you so much for being here and for sharing and for contributing to such an important conversation. I know this conversation is not easy to have either, and there's many dimensions of it. So I just appreciate you, sharing that with me and the rest of us here. So thank you. Please join in.
Thank you, guys.